Mr. Ellis made a name for himself when he was only 21 with the publication of his debut novel, Less Than Zero, which became a generational touchstone and continues to find new readers. Mr. Ellis is the author of 4 other novels, including American Psycho and Lunar Park, and the short story collection, The Informers. 4 of his books have been adapted into film, including The Informers, for which Mr. Ellis co-wrote the screenplay, and his writing has been translated into 27 languages. Imperial Bedrooms is a sequel of sorts to Less Than Zero. We're reintroduced to Clay and his group of rich and dangerously leisured friends 25 years after the events of Less Than Zero. When Clay, a successful screenwriter living in New York, returns to Los Angeles to help cast his most recent movie, he catches up with his old friends, shacks up with a young wannabe actress, and starts receiving bizarre, threatening text messages. People magazine called Imperial Bedrooms a hypnotic, haunting vision of disillusionment, 21st century style, and Time Out New York called the book arrestingly spare and continued, Imperial Bedrooms will leave you feeling bruised, guarded, and a little nervous about noises at night.
Thank you. Thank you guys for coming out tonight. I'm going to read very briefly from this book, Imperial Bedrooms, no more than 10 minutes, and then I'd like to open it straight up to a Q&A and just have a conversation, I don't know, a dialogue with the audience. I think that's probably going to work best since I've got nothing else prepared. Yeah, you know, this is a sequel in a way to Less Than Zero. The Clay of this book maintains that the Clay of Less Than Zero was misrepresented, even though a lot of the stuff in Less Than Zero happened to him. The Clay of Imperial Bedrooms maintains that the writer of Less Than Zero just didn't like Clay very much and portrayed him as this kind of passive, drifting dude who didn't do anything to help anybody really. And what Imperial Bedrooms becomes, in a way, is the quote-unquote real Clay's attempt to make a claim for himself, which, as you continue to read the novel, you'll realize is kind of pointless on his part, that maybe the writer of Less Than Zero did get it right. The brief section that I'm going to read has to do with how the Clay of Imperial Bedrooms feels about the movie adaptation of that book about him. The movie adaptation of the book about him that book that he didn't like. Even though everything in that book, he said a lot of the stuff happened to him, he really just didn't like that book, and these are his thoughts about the movie version of that book about him that he didn't like. So, I remember my trepidation about the movie began on a warm October night, 3 weeks prior to its theatrical release, in a screening room on the 20th Century Fox lot. I was sitting between Trent Burroughs and Julian, who wasn't clean yet and kept biting his nails, squirming in the plush black chair with anticipation. I saw Blair walk in with Alana and Kim and trailing Rip Millar. I ignored her. The movie was very different from the book in that there was nothing from the book in the movie. Despite everything, all the pain I felt, the betrayal, I couldn't help but recognize a truth while sitting in that screening room. In the book, everything about me had happened. The book was something I simply couldn't disavow. The book was blunt and had an honesty about it, whereas the movie was just a beautiful lie. It was also a bummer, very colorful and busy, but also grim and expensive, and it didn't recoup its cost when released that November. In the movie, I was played by an actor who actually looked more like me than the character the author portrayed in the book. I wasn't blonde, I wasn't tan, and neither was the actor. I also suddenly became the movie's moral compass, spouting AA jargon, castigating everyone's drug use, and trying to save Julian. I'll sell my car, I warned the actor playing Julian's dealer, whatever it takes. This was slightly less true of the adaptation of Blair's character, played by a girl who actually seemed like she belonged in our group, jittery, sexually available, easily wounded. Julian became the sentimentalized version of himself, acted by a talented, sad-faced clown who has an affair with Blair and then realizes he has to let her go because I was his best bud. Be good to her, Julian tells Clay. She really deserves it. The sheer hypocrisy of the scene must have made the author blanch. Smiling secretly to myself with perverse satisfaction when the actor delivered that line, I then glanced at Blair in the darkness of the screening room. As the movie glided across the giant screen, restlessness began to reverberate in the hushed auditorium. The audience, the book's actual cast, quickly realized what had happened. The reason the movie dropped everything that made the novel real was because there was no way the parents who ran the studio would ever expose their children in the same black light the book did. The movie was begging for our sympathy, whereas the book didn't give a shit. And attitudes about drugs and sex had shifted quickly from 1985 to 1987, and a regime change at the studio didn't help. So the source material, surprisingly conservative despite its surface immorality, had to be reshaped. The best way to look at the movie was as modern 80s noir. The cinematography was breathtaking, and I sighed as it kept streaming forward, interested in only a few things. The new and gentle details of my parents mildly amused me, as did Blair finding her divorced father with his girlfriend on Christmas Eve instead of with a boy named Jared. Blair's father died of AIDS in 1992 while still married to Blair's mother. But the thing I remember most about that screening in October 20 years ago was the moment Julian grasped my hand that had gone numb on the armrest separating our seats. He did this because in the book, Julian Wells lived, but in this new movie's scenario, he had to die. He had to be punished for all of his sins. That's what the movie demanded. Later, as a screenwriter, I learned it's what all movies demanded. When the scene occurred in the last 10 minutes, Julian looked at me in the darkness, stunned. "I died," he whispered. "They killed me off." I waited a beat before sighing, "But you're still here." Julian turned back to the screen, and soon the movie ended, the credits rolling over the palm trees as I improbably take Blair back to my college, while Roy Orbison wails a song about how life fades away. But the real Julian Wells didn't die in a cherry red convertible overdosing on a highway in Joshua Tree while a choir soared over the soundtrack. The real Julian Wells was murdered over 20 years later, his body dumped behind an abandoned apartment building in Los Feliz after he had been tortured to death at another location. His head was crushed, his face struck with such force that it had partly folded in on itself, and he had been stabbed so brutally that the LA coroner's office counted 159 wounds from 3 different knives, many of them overlapping. His body was discovered by a group of kids who went to CalArts and were cruising through the streets off of Hillhurst in a convertible BMW looking for a parking space. When they saw the body, they thought the quote-unquote thing lined by a trash bin was, and I'm quoting the first Los Angeles Times article on the front page of the California section about the Julian Wells murder, a flag. I had to stop when I hit upon that word and start reading the article again from the beginning. The students who found Julian thought this because Julian was wearing a white Tom Ford suit. It had belonged to him, but it wasn't something he was wearing the night he was abducted. And their immediate reaction seemed halfway logical, since the jacket and pants were streaked with red. Julian had been stripped before he was killed and then redressed. But if they thought it was a flag, my immediate question was then where was the blue? If the body resembled a flag, I kept wondering, then where was the blue? And then I realized it was his head. The students thought it was a flag because Julian had lost so much blood that his crumpled face was a blue so dark it was almost black. But then I should have realized this sooner because, in my own way, I had put Julian there, and I had seen what had happened to him in another and very different movie. Thanks. That was cheery. I don't know. I was deciding what to read up on the train ride today, and for some reason, that was it. That was the kind of mood I was in, I guess. I don't know. But I'm going to open everything up to questions. If anyone has any questions, and we can just, like, you know, do it like that. The question is, I guess, if I pared it down, as why do you write the books that you write, more or less? Okay, the question is, how do I think about being a writer as a career? It's not a choice. I never saw it as a choice. It was something that I wanted to do from very early on. I began writing when I was a kid, and I think I began writing because I liked books so much. There were a lot of books around my house, my parents' house, and I was reading books, and I think I loved reading so much that kind of, as this kind of transporting experience, that I wanted to write books myself. And so ultimately, it never really felt like a choice to me. It felt like something very natural, something very emotional, something that I wanted to do. It was never like some kind of logical or pragmatic decision. It was, oh, I like books, I want to write books. And that really has how it has been ever since I wrote my first children's book when I was a kid, up until, you know, this book. I mean, so that's the only way that I know how to do it. I just don't wake up one day and say, oh, I'm going to write the sequel to Less Than Zero, and I'm going to start next Monday at 9 a.m., and that's just how it's going to be. I mean, it's, you know, every book is comes from an emotional place, and it's something that you feel, and it's something that I think about for a long time before I'm absolutely sure that I want to sit down and write the book. So that is kind of my process in a way. I mean, that's how it's, and it also is a slow process, because it then means that I haven't written as many books as I might have liked to have written, but it's just, you can't will a book, you can't force a book out. Though I think some people do, but I'm not that kind of writer. Well, the description of the movie compared to how this character feels about the book, pretty much exactly. Yeah, it was the movie version of Less Than Zero really bears no resemblance to the book for a million reasons. I mean, a lot of stuff happened when that movie was made that turned it into something that it wasn't supposed to be, and because this is a book about Hollywood and it's a book about people involved in the movie industry, I thought it would be an interesting way to begin the book, and also an interesting way to talk about how Julian Wells does die in the movie version of Less Than Zero. But I wanted to keep him around in this book because I thought, once I figured out who Clay was and what Clay was doing back in LA, I wanted Julian to kind of revolve around him a little bit. And so it was also a way for me to get Julian back into the picture. It worked on a lot of different levels for me. So the question is, do I work on multiple things at one time? And then there's more to the question, but I can answer it without repeating the rest of the question, because I don't work on multiple books at all. And every book that I've had an idea for, I published. I don't have anything laying around. I don't have half-written manuscripts. I don't have, there weren't ideas that I wished I had pursued that I didn't. No, every idea I've had for a novel I've written and that I published. And I think part of why I don't have anything like half written or partly written is because, again, the process is I think about the book a lot, and I think, do I want to spend this long with the book, and do I really want to write this book? And I make a lot of notes before I even begin writing the book, and I make a very long outline before I even begin writing the book, and in some way that outline resembles a first draft, a very long, sloppy first draft. And by that time, I'm completely excited by the book, and I'm engaged by it, and it's gripping me, and then I'm writing the book, and I want to write the book, and I'm finishing the book. And so that's the best way. I know a lot of people who, like writers, say, oh, well, I'm just going to let the novel take it where it's going to take me. I'm just going to start with, Stephen and Cheryl went to the cafe, and they had a drink, and they saw this dog that they liked, and it began to rain or whatever. And then we have thousands of novels that stop at page 120, and that the person just doesn't know, they kind of lose their enthusiasm for it, and because they didn't figure out where it's going to go, and it's, it can be a depressing situation. So that's what, the question was, do I ever want to go back to the multiple narrator style that I did in The Rules of Attraction or in The Informers? It's not, well, I actually did think about it very briefly when I was thinking about Imperial Bedrooms. I thought about doing that and then discarded it very quickly. But no, I haven't, and I don't know why. I don't know why. The question is, why am I so talented? How do I come up with all of this stuff? That's really the question, isn't it? Like, why am I... God, the question really is, how do I come up with all of these funny lines, is what she was asking. I think a lot of things happen. I think that once I figure out who the narrator of the book is, and that takes a long time too, and when I figure out what he will notice and what he will hear and what he wants to present to the reader, which is me basically, because that's how I work, then a certain kind of humor can announce itself, and so I think that's why. I don't know. I mean, but that's a very complimentary question, and it's much appreciated. It really is. That's another really wonderful question. Love it. That's so nice. I wrote a novel. The first novel I wrote was when I was 14, and I thought I had had an extremely interesting summer. and I wrote the novel about my extremely interesting summer, and then after I read the novel, I realized it wasn't an extremely interesting summer at all. And that was a huge learning experience for me. And after that novel, that's when I began, I guess, I don't know what to call it, I guess the Less Than Zero project in a way, because there were many drafts of that book between the time I was 16 and 21. I think a lot of people seem to think that I wrote that book in like 8 weeks, got a huge fat publishing deal, it got totally overhyped, and boom, you know, there was this thing. It didn't work that way at all. It was a very long process, and you know, looking back, I mean, I guess no one's really asked me that before. I mean, looking back, I guess you have to have a certain kind, I guess I didn't second guess myself at all. I guess I did have a lot of confidence in it, or I wasn't even thinking along the lines of having confidence, just that I wanted to do it and that I was enjoying doing it. I didn't step into that realm of starting to second guess myself, and I really don't do that. I mean, some of my critics tell me I should be doing that. But I don't work that way. It's just not how I work. I don't see novel writing to be like, I don't know, to be this like consortium, or to be like a business in a way where, you know, you have to show it to like 10 people to make sure it's good, or you have to write it in a way so you're going to get like good reviews or whatever. I mean, it's just a really personal means of expression, and it's nothing, you know. So that's how I always saw it. I didn't see it as, well, I guess what I'm saying is, well, it doesn't have to be good. It just sort of has to be, you know, and you know what? Actually, that comes out of my mouth, and it was supposed to be kind of a joke. But yes, there are beautifully written novels that are dead, completely dead, and there are novels that are kind of sloppy and punchy, but yeah, they have a pulse to them, and they feel alive in a way that a beautifully manicured novel can feel utterly dead. So, to get back to your question. No, I guess I didn't second guess myself, and I guess that I just, you know, kept moving forward, and I didn't even think along those lines. Okay, in reality, I would rather, I mean, you know, they're made up people, they're made up characters. They're not real books, or they're not real stories or anything, but I would rather hang out with Clay, probably. Not a lot of effort, not a lot of energy has to be expended there. It would be very easy to just like deal with him. I think Patrick Bateman would be a little bit different. I got a glimpse of actually hanging out with Patrick Bateman when I was doing some kind of research, the initial research that I did on American Psycho, where I was hanging out with young guys who were working on Wall Street, and that wasn't fun. It wasn't fun at all. And then I. Well, the other example was that when Christian Bale was about, well, he had the role, but he didn't want to do it without my approval, which was in retrospect, I think, crazy. But I get it. He's an actor, and he just needed the writer to approve. And I think he would have done it regardless. So I don't know why. But I had never met him before, and he did. And I was supposed to meet him in a restaurant in Los Angeles, and I was at the bar having a drink, and someone tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hi, Bret, Pat Bateman." And he had completely dressed like Patrick Bateman. His hair was slicked back, and he stayed in character for like 10 minutes, and it was the most unnerving, creepy thing that I've ever experience. And I actually told him after 10 minutes, we were at the table and my hand was shaking a little bit. I said, "You've got to stop this. You can't act like this anymore." It's like getting really out of control. So, okay, that's an easy, now thinking that through, yes, I would rather sit with Clay, who was the most reliable of those narrators. You know what? I think they're pretty much both reliable, I think. I really do. I mean, I know all this, everyone says it, well, I was going to like say something stupid, like they're both reliable in their unreliability, but I'm not even, that opens it up to a whole other thing that we don't want to go to. But, okay, the question is, do I read my reviews and do they have any impact on me at all? I read all of my reviews. I read all the reviews that are written about me. Regardless of how good or how bad they are, they have little to no impact at all on what I'm working on or what I want to write about. And I've found the whole idea of, I mean, and I like a lot of reviewers. I like a lot of writers who have written about me who haven't been particularly favorable. I mean, I read like their other opinions on books and stuff. So no, I would say for like 99% of the time, it doesn't matter. I don't really feel much of anything when I'm reading the reviews, though every now and then in the last, whatever, during my career, there have been those moments where a writer that I've admired has given me a bad review, and that has stung a little bit. Not enough to distract me from my day, but it's like, oh, that kind of sucks. But overall, no, they don't. The question is, why do I use characters from one book in another book, and why does there seem to be this floating cast of characters in all the books? You know, there's no plan. There's not any kind of secret code, anything that's like, it's just something, it's a feeling. It's just something that I like to do. And every now and then, you know, it happens. I think, oh, that'll be really interesting to use that character from that book as the narrator for this book. Like, for example, in Rules of Attraction, that's when Patrick Bateman first makes his appearance. And I had a vague idea for American Psycho, but when I wrote Rules of Attraction, Patrick Bateman was not at all going to be the narrator. And then as I began the year or so of thinking about American Psycho and what that book was going to be about, I kept going back to him for some reason, and I wanted to use him. And I can't explain why. There was not like this. Again, it's not a logical thing. You know, it's just it's a feeling that you have, and so. And it happens all the time. I mean, I remember when I was working on Lunar Park, and I wanted these neighbors to live, you know, next to the Bret Easton Ellis character and his wife. And I was thinking, okay, I wanted the neighbor to be like this, and they probably would be like this, and et cetera, et cetera. And then for some reason, I flashed on a peripheral character in the Rules of Attraction called Mitchell Allen. And then when I thought about that and using him, it just gave me this opportunity to have the Bret Ellis character talk about his sexual past and being at Camden, because they went to Camden College together, Mitchell Allen and the Bret Ellis character. And it's just things like that. But there's no grand plan to any of that. And so the question is, was I happy with The Informers, the movie version of it? And if someone made Lunar Park into a movie, how would I want to see that done? Well, Lunar Park is being turned into a movie. I have really nothing to do with it. There's Phil Alden Robinson, I think, is the director now attached, and I think he made Field of Dreams. And he's made, and there were a lot of directors attached to this movie for a long time. You get it, the father-son thing, that's what the producers were thinking. It's fine, it's fine. I mean, who knows if it'll get made, I don't know. And there have been a lot of actors attached to it, and I don't even, Benicio del Toro was attached to play the lead for a long time. And then I think Jude Law was attached at one point, and I would rather see Jude Law play me than Benicio del Toro, so I'm just vain. The Informers, the movie version of that, was a, I had to laugh, I'm sorry, because you asked me if I was happy with how it turned out. And I was not happy with how The Informers turned out. It was a very painful situation, and it was the first time that I had stepped forward to assist in the adaptation of a book of mine. And I wrote a really great script. It was pretty good. It really was. And because of this great script, we got like a ton of actors to be in it, and we got a ton of money to make the movie. And then, like shit happened, and it just didn't. There's a director sensibility. There was a producer involved who kind of bowed down to the director. They cut out the vampires. You know, there was like a lot of bad decisions were made, and I was not in. I mean, even if you're a producer on a movie and you're the co-writer of the script, you're not the money man. You know, and they make a lot of the decisions. A lot of the creative decisions too. And so by the time that movie was done, it was kind of, I wouldn't say completely unrecognizable from the script that was written, but I would have to say that there's about 40% of it missing, and about 80% of the movie itself is kind of tonally off from what I had planned. So, you know, I'm not gonna, I've complained about it a lot, but you know, it's whatever it is. The experience of what? Instead of being old and being not hot, instead of being, yeah, I mean, what is there to say about it? It was, yeah. Well, you know, people, like, I was beginning to tell that story a little bit in answering one of the questions about what happened like with Less Than Zero, whereas, you know, the myth that I wrote it very quickly and that it was published and that it was an immediate success and that, you know, I was on the cover of all these magazines and stuff, and really that's not true at all. Again, I worked on that book for about 5 years. It was published when I was 21, and people tend to forget that I was paid the least amount of money you can possibly be paid for a book. It was like in the lowest, you know, 4 figures that you could get. About $5,000 bucks. About $5,000 for the book, and no advertising money at all. And I was just happy to have a book published. I mean, I didn't really intend on getting Less Than Zero published. It was something that I wanted to do. And then when one of my teachers at Bennington read it, they said, "Oh, I'm going to pass it on to my agent, my editor." And I said, "Sure, whatever." I mean, it didn't really strike me as something that was going to happen. And then when it did, it all happened in slow motion, and it happened over a very long period of time. There was no prints. There was no money for advertising because half of the publishing house hated it. Half the editorial board really hated it, and the younger part of the editorial board really pushed for the book. And so, the part of the editorial board that was in power in terms of, like, you know, promoting books said, "Okay, you can publish the damn thing, but we're not going to promote it." And so it didn't really become a success until 5 or 6 months later, and I was in school, and I suddenly noticed I was getting more calls from my publishing house and my agency, and, you know, that's how it happened. And then when it did become a success, I was still in school, and if anybody's ever been up to Bennington, I don't know why anyone would have been up there, it's very far away from anything, and it's very small. And I think that year, my senior year, when the book really kind of took off, I was, you know, I was kind of protected. I wanted to finish college, and I was still at this very small school that was very hard to reach, and it wasn't. You know, everyone said, "Oh, it must have been so wild. It must have been so crazy." It really wasn't. And then when I got out of school and I moved to New York, I mean, everyone seems to think that I was part of this like crazy brat pack thing that was going on, and I made fun of this whole thing in Lunar Park. In the first like 30 or 40 pages of Lunar Park, I kind of wrote this like mock memoir of what people, I think, thought my life was like at that point, when in fact I was just like, you know, most 23-year-olds hanging out with his friends. Everyone likes to think that I was hanging out with Jay McInerney and that we were doing tons of blow all the time and that we were passing out at nightclubs. And I might have been doing all of that, but it was with my friends. It wasn't with Jay McInerney. And so, you know, it's really, it's so interesting to see how the myth takes over. And I'm constantly amused by it. I mean, that this myth of Bret Easton Ellis, and I think part of the reason why I felt the urge to write Lunar Park stemmed from that, you know, and to write that opening chapter of the book stemmed from, I don't know, in a way wanting to set the record straight. I don't know, or really not, kind of like avoiding setting the record straight, but I don't know, giving whatever I did in that. So yeah, it was, and yeah, it was also really, really fun. I had a really good time being hot and young and sexy. It was awesome. Awesome. I loved it. I loved it. The question more or less is like, what is it again? It's sort of like, does the writing change while I'm being inspired by other writers? Is that kind of what you're getting at? No, not really. No, I don't think so. I think the idea for the novel has already been influenced by certain writers by the time I'm writing it. And I knew, like, for example, with Lunar Park, I always I wanted to write a Stephen King book, and I loved Stephen King when I was an adolescent, and I had my own ideas to how to do a Stephen King book, and so that's kind of where that came from. But I wasn't rereading Stephen King while I was working on Lunar Park. I mean, I already kind of knew his style, and I wanted to replicate it because it was fun, you know, and it was something I wanted to do. And it's ironic that really to get to the last third of that book, which is the Stephen King homage, I felt like I had to do all this other stuff that, while interesting and fun, I had to build it up to get there. And it's very ironic that most people hate the last third of Lunar Park and really like the first 2/3, which I always thought were not as much fun to write as the last third. So, you know, maybe I should take those people into consideration. The people who's, you know, maybe I should show my book to more people and get more feedback. I don't know. But and I was also thinking a lot about Philip Roth in the beginning of Lunar Park. I was thinking a lot about Don DeLillo when I was working on Glamorama. So and I totally ripped off Joan Didion for Less Than Zero. So I've always been, and Raymond Chandler was a big part of Imperial Bedrooms. So there is always some sort of author hovering in the back of my head that I'm referencing. It just seems to be the way that I like to work, you know? So that's good. The question is, where do I get my inspiration from? And pain. Pain. That's where the inspiration comes from. And my own pain. A lot of it is. A lot of it stems from confusion and being upset by something and trying to figure out why I am upset by this and why is this bothering me and why am I obsessed with it. And yeah, I mean, that's where it all comes from. It comes from confusion and stress and pain. And, you know, it's weird. I really, you know, for the longest time, I did not want to talk about, because of the controversy over American Psycho, I really never, I took a very defensive mode when that book came out. And I said, oh yes, but no one, it's being completely misread. It's a grand sweeping statement on Wall Street greed and yuppie materialism. You don't understand. And it's not misogynist in nature, blah, 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 blah. You know. When in fact, that novel was about me. And it was about my loneliness and my pain and my isolation and my alienation during that period of my life. And moving to New York and being introduced into the world of adults and being hugely disappointed by this world, by their values, by what was expected of me as an adult, and by a kind of, you know, yuppiedom is always, it was just that was a trendy, you know, tagline for just consumerism in general. And basically how a certain class of people held, I don't know, held these things to value that were, that didn't make them happy and seemed to make them more miserable, and, you know, on and on and on. So anyway, that's really where American Psycho came from. And it's only been lately that I feel comfortable enough to kind of talk about that. Of course, it did become something bigger as the book took on this shape and it became about, you know, different things, but that's where that book stemmed from. And I would say that's true for every book I've written, whether it was, for example, like Lamorama. I was thinking a lot about having your private persona replaced by your public persona. And of course, as always, I was thinking about my father, who's always like somehow present, you know, in all of the books, because the father is at the center of this conspiracy to replace his son in Glamorama. So, you know, it comes from, you know, pain. And in a way, writing the book is a way to get rid of that pain. And I know this sounds so Oprah and so touchy-feely, but they really are usually exorcisms in a way. They really are. They do work at freeing yourself from whatever these constraints that these feelings, like, you know, tied you down with. And so that's where it comes from. The question is, okay, how do you deal with plot? I don't know. I really don't. It's not something that I am overtly concerned with. And it's, you know, I'm just not that kind of writer. It just is logical sometimes. Like, the story just unfolds in a way that I want it to unfold. A lot of the times my plots are very convoluted and dreamlike. Sometimes, I mean, for half of Less Than Zero, there is no plot. There's just like people drifting around, and it's more behavioral and descriptive rather than plot-driven. So I don't know. The plot is held in that outline that I work on, and it's, you know, I guess what I'm trying to say is that everything springs from the emotion, and that includes the narrator, the story, the way the story is structured, i.e. the plot. And it all comes from there. It's all part of one, like, you know, big feeling, I guess. Okay, whoever really wants to ask the questions really should wave their hand a little bit, so I can, like, so it's not like you just like want to half ask a question, but if you really want to ask a question, because the time is running short, and I just want to get the people who really want to ask the question. Because sometimes I hit someone who, you know, has like a question about, you know, I don't know, what's your favorite Starbucks or something, and it's like, it wastes some time. But if there's someone who really wants to ask me something, and also you can ask me during the signing, but okay, so I'm looking at a waving hand. The question, dare I repeat this, is like about my reputation in a way seems set, and how do I deal with that psychologically in a way? Oh my God. Well, you know what? I'm not thinking that way. I mean, I'm not. Well, I wasn't thinking that way, but now that you say this, no, I don't know. Look, honestly, I really don't think that way, and that's not. I never wrote for like posterity. I never wrote to be whatever popular or famous or whatever. I mean, I just write because I like to write, and that really, there's no pressure there. There really is no pressure in terms of writing a novel. I don't feel any. I feel pressure in other areas of my life. I don't feel any pressure in terms of having to write a particular kind of novel or to, take into account this and this and this in terms of quote unquote a career. I just write these novels and I like writing them, and I don't feel any pressure to follow up a novel, to write a novel that's going to sell more copies than another novel, to try to write a novel that's going to be an Oprah pick, or to be, try to win an award or anything. I just don't. I don't look at it that way. So that's assuring to me, I think. The second question is about. He is a big Roger Avary fan, and he asked me if I had any chance to visit Roger Avary, who wrote and directed The Rules of Attraction. And also co-wrote Pulp Fiction. If I have visited him in jail, because he's in jail. No, he's in jail right now. And I have not. He's going to be released shortly. And which, if I want to be very selfish about it, bodes well for Glamorama as a movie, because he owns the rights to that. So the other question was about how I'm, on a certain level, I act like I'm not that concerned about a lot of things in terms of being a public writer, but yet on the design of something like Imperial Bedrooms, and especially with the very douchey photograph of myself on back, what's up is sort of like what he's asking. A very valid question. It's a good question. The book, to me, I like books. I like holding books. I like looking at books. I like book covers. I have always, from day one, from lesson zero, always thought that an author's photograph is a big. You tend to turn to it a lot when you're reading a novel. Maybe not that much, but it's present. And its presence, I always felt, was that image. I always felt was sort of as important as the cover. And in every book that I've published, I've been very conscious of that photograph being representative of, in a way, the character who's narrating the book. And that's true with every hardcover photograph that I've had taken. And it is true. I worked with a photographer, Jeff Burton, for 2 to 3 days to get just the right douchey pose, outfit, smirk. It was more like 2 days, but until we were finally satisfied that yes, if you're reading this book and you see this devil on the cover, and then you're looking at the back of the author photo, a set of associations is going to come, and hopefully that might give the entire reading experience a totality that I find very satisfying as a reader. That is why that is there. But that has really nothing to do, again, but that's really the anti of wanting to win awards or wanting to win people over in a way, but it's a good point. Movies that are influencing me that I like, well, I don't know. I think movies in general influenced me when I was starting out. I think they influenced me as much as books probably did. But are you talking about recently, or just in general, or what kind of movies influenced my work in terms of?
Particularly for Imperial Bedrooms.
Oh, well, what kind of movies influenced me for Imperial Bedrooms? Really, no movies influenced Imperial Bedrooms, really. I mean, when I'm working on a script, well, no, I can't even say that I'm influenced by movies when I'm working on a script. I'm influenced by the story and what I want to do. When I'm working on a novel, I'm influenced by the idea of it as a book. I don't know if I'm really if the books themselves are really influenced by movies so much. So I don't know, but I'm an avid moviegoer. I like to go to movies a lot. It's the only thing I seem to tweet about. I mean, I really don't really, So I don't. That's like a half-assed answer, I know, but it's, I don't know, the best that I can do. I'm sorry. The question concerns the promotion of this book and how the reality of the book has seeped into the reality, the general reality of the real world. I don't know. Is that my decision, or do other people make that decision? Other people really make that decision. I mean, I'm sorry that I'm not more hands-on in terms of what the promotion for the books are about, but I'm really not. Once the book is done, yes, I like to go out and promote the book for my house in terms of like going to events like these and like that. But in terms of like designing a promotional thing for the book, no, I'm really not. That would never have crossed my mind to do that. She's referencing in Los Angeles Magazine and also on the website. There's Bret Easton, who is, I guess, the narrator of this book. They do a thing where a map of all the places he likes to go in LA, and in his voice he talks about why these places mean a lot to him. And they're all places that are referenced in Imperial Bedrooms. That was not my idea. I did not have that idea. I kind of like made some suggestions on it, but no, that was not my idea. The question is about how trendy I am in a way. Do I actively go back into a book and put in more up-to-date references as it nears publication in a way? I know don't worry, but I'm just talking it through to myself in terms of like what the question is. No, it's all organic. It's whatever I think the narrator would notice. I am not, look, I think of the narrator, I think of what their taste would be like, I think of what they would be listening to. It doesn't necessarily correspond to mine. I know in Glamorama, Victor Ward has this encyclopedic knowledge of pop music that I really don't have. But I felt that it was kind of funny and that it was kind of integral to who he was as a person. When people tell me, oh my God, American Psycho, it must have been so hellish to write all those violent scenes and all those like women are getting murdered and it must have been so hard to write. I said, listen to Genesis records for a month and then I will tell you that's harrowing. That's harrowing, but then I also felt what would his favorite groups be? Like he'd like Whitney Houston, like Genesis, he'd like Huey Lewis, thank you. I tried to block it out of my head, and actually Huey Lewis isn't that bad. Out of the three of them, I like Huey Lewis probably the best. But so no, no, like that Bat for Lashes reference in Imperial Bedrooms was there pretty much from day one when I thought of that sequence, and Clay's like a middle-aged white dude. Yes, he's listening to the National a lot, so it's like it's not. It feels It just whatever feels right for the narrator is what I like. Whatever makes it more authentic, that's what I like to use. So it's not. It is conscious in a way, but it's conscious in a way that's organic to the narrator. Who was yes? Okay. We're only getting two more left. We're getting you and you. So like the pressure's on you, by the way. You get the last question of the night. Okay, so you just been all right. Yes. The question's about the remake of Less Than Zero and if anyone is actually going to do an authentic remake of the book. Of it as a film. And that is every month I hear something about that happening. And I hear it from I hear Quentin Tarantino's interested in doing it, or Greg Araki, or people want to turn it into a TV series, or this is always whispered to me all the time. I don't know. That would be great if that happened. I did read a couple of scripts from people that I thought were, okay. I don't know. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. And would I like to see it happen? Yeah, sure. It would be fun. I mean, it's not something. It really doesn't keep me awake at night. It doesn't really keep me awake. All right, I'm just waiting because I'm going to look over at you, and you're going to be the last question of the evening, and I'm interested in what it is. I'm interested. Does anybody in the audience have an answer for that? Like where? Okay, does anybody have another answer than that? Does anybody have an answer as to why I'm not going to write a sequel to Glamorama with Victor Ward as a narrator?
That's not what I'm asking. No, maybe I should ask you.
Okay, ask me again. Ask.
Where is Victor?
Okay, I'm going to ask someone in the audience, where does anybody know where Victor Ward is? Has anybody read this book? Does someone want to give an answer? Does someone raise their hand and tell me? Okay.
Celebrity Apprentice.
Someone else? Okay. Anybody else? Correct. He's dead. He's dead. So I like the snorting. I know it's on your mind, actually, snorting coke off strippers, but yeah, that's why there isn't one. There is not going to be a sequel to that. Now, I did think about briefly, this is why I don't write that many novels, I did briefly think about doing a sequel to Glamorama with the guy pretending to be Victor Ward at the end of that book and what that might entail. But I think the gentleman in that row over there wins the prize. He read the novel correctly. He's dead. On that note, we open it with a cheery note. We're ending it with a cheery note. I am going to sign everyone's books. You can bring whatever you want up, and pictures are allowed, and we'll start the signing. So thank you, guys.